The story takes us to Washington, USA, a state known for its natural beauty, large public parks, and majestic mountains. Washington boasts vast stretches of Douglas fir forests, which, while perfect for a refreshing walk or change of scenery, can also serve as a secluded spot for someone to bury a body without anyone noticing. In a small, charming city on the outskirts of Washington called Lacey, a strange and chilling incident occurred on Sunday, October 16, 2022. Around noon, emergency services received a phone call from a smartwatch. The caller was a woman who couldn't speak, but it was unmistakably clear that she was in desperate need of help and urgently.
911, what are you reporting? Hello? Can you hear me?
From that call, it felt like the woman was gagged or restrained, frantically pressing any button on her smartwatch. There were also clear sounds of banging or scuffling in the background. Then, suddenly, the call went silent. Since she couldn't speak, the emergency responders couldn't get her address, but they managed to pinpoint the call's location through the smartwatch's signal. The police quickly headed to the location. The signal led them to a house in a beautiful neighborhood. Luckily, the smartwatch was still active and the line remained open. Through the device, the officers could hear the sound of a car leaving the house. Moments later, the sound of the police entering the residence was also captured by the smartwatch. When the police entered the house, they found no one inside. However, they noticed that the house was slightly disheveled. The front door was open and the garage door was wide open. Inside the garage, they found the smartwatch that had been used to make the emergency call lying on the floor. Shortly after the police arrived, two people showed up at the house, 20-year-old Crystal and her 11-year-old brother. They identified themselves as the children of the homeowner, young Suk-an, a 42-year-old Korean woman. The police began questioning Crystal. She explained that she, her brother, and their mother had gone to church that morning, as they did every Sunday. When they returned, they noticed their father's car parked in the driveway in front of the garage. Crystal said this wasn't unusual, even though her parents were in the process of getting divorced. Her father typically visited once a week. Crystal added that her mother asked her to take her younger brother and leave the house for a while so she could speak with their father privately. Crystal complied, taking her brother out for about half an hour. Around noon, as they were returning home, Crystal received an emergency alert on her phone from her mother's device. The alert included a map of their home's location. The message had been triggered automatically when her mother called emergency services. When Crystal returned home, she found that her father's car was gone, her mother was nowhere to be seen, and the police were standing outside the house. Crystal granted the officers permission to search the house. Inside, they found the home in disarray, with broken items, including Young's phone. Most concerning of all was a piece of duct tape with strands of hair stuck to it. At this point, the police realized that this wasn't their first visit to the house. About a year earlier, in August 2021, Young's husband, 52-year-old Chi Kung-an, had been charged with assaulting her during a domestic dispute. Shortly afterward, the couple filed for divorce and Chi moved out, leaving Young and the children in the house. Now, both Young and Chi were missing. The question remained, had Chi kidnapped Young or had both of them been abducted? The police acted swiftly. Investigators, patrol officers, and a search team scoured the area and the neighborhood. They also gathered surveillance footage from street cameras and security systems at neighboring houses on the same street. One of the videos from a neighbor's house showed a man wearing a white shirt and dark shorts standing in the driveway in front of the garage. He was seen entering a vehicle, closing the garage door, and then driving away at high speed. In another video, the same vehicle was spotted driving past a police car just seconds before the officers arrived at Young's house following the emergency call. The van had barely left the house when the police arrived. Multiple cameras captured the vehicle heading south. When Crystal saw the surveillance footage, she immediately identified the man near the garage as her father, Chi. Based on all the evidence so far, the authorities strongly believe that Chi had kidnapped Young. The police quickly released a wanted poster with photos of both Young and Chi, distributing it to patrol officers and posting it on social media in hopes that someone might have seen Young or Chi's blue minivan. Unfortunately, the appeal for information didn't yield any useful leads. But what could have led to all of this? What would drive Chi to kidnap Young? To understand what led to this tragic incident, we need to go back in time and delve into the family's story. Chi Kung-an, the husband, worked in military intelligence. Some speculated that the nature of his job and the stress it entailed made him a highly irritable person. His relationship with young Suk-an was tumultuous because Chi often took out his frustrations on his family, especially his wife. He had threatened her multiple times, leaving Young fearing for her safety and that of her children. As a result, Young decided to leave him to protect herself and her kids. However, she never imagined that Chi's threats would one day turn into a horrifying reality. On Sunday, October 16th, the day began like any other. Young went to church with her children as usual. Afterward, they returned home to find Chi already there. After greeting him, Young asked her daughter Crystal to take her younger brother and step out for a while. She wanted to discuss divorce-related matters with Chi, particularly how to divide their finances. Crystal left with her brother, and during this time, Young and Chi began their conversation. It quickly escalated into a heated argument. When Young asked Chi to leave the house, saying she couldn't continue the discussion, Chi apparently didn't take it well and refused to leave. The argument grew more intense, with Chi growing increasingly agitated. Eventually, Young went upstairs to her bedroom, likely to avoid further conflict or because she was exhausted from the confrontation, but Chi didn't let it go. Overcome with rage, he followed her to the bedroom, attacked her, and struck her multiple times in the head. Chi, being physically stronger than Young and a former military man trained in combat, overpowered her. He began threatening her, saying he would kill her because he refused to share any of his money after their divorce. He tied her hands and feet with duct tape, rendering her completely immobile. He also taped her mouth and eyes, making it impossible for her to see or scream for help. Some reports indicate that he tied her hands behind her back, though the exact details vary. After immobilizing her, Chi left the room briefly to pull his car into the garage. Young seized the opportunity and used her smartwatch to call emergency services. Some sources suggest she managed to make the call using her nose. Despite being restrained, she successfully dialed and stayed on the line with emergency responders. Chi returned and dragged Young from the bedroom down the stairs. If you recall, the emergency call captured sounds of banging and thudding, which was likely Chi dragging her down the staircase. Being trained in intelligence work, Chi noticed the smartwatch on her wrist and grew suspicious. To eliminate any risks, he grabbed a hammer and smashed the watch while it was still on her wrist. He kept hitting it until it detached from her hand, but he didn't realize the device was still functioning. The watch, left on the garage floor, would later help police locate the house. Chi placed Young in the trunk of his car and sped away. In a cruel twist of fate, as Chi drove away, his car passed the police vehicle heading toward Young's house in response to her emergency call. Young, bound and blindfolded in the trunk, desperately tried to open it but couldn't due to her restraints and lack of visibility. Chi drove to a remote forested area, stopped at a specific spot, and pulled Young out of the car. He laid her on the ground and returned to the vehicle to retrieve a shovel. Realizing what was happening, Young suspected he was digging her grave, and she was right. After finishing the hole, Chi stabbed Young in the chest with a long, thin knife. He then threw her into the grave and placed a heavy wooden plank on top of her. Despite her injuries and near suffocation, Young was miraculously still alive. Struggling to breathe, she managed to tilt her head slightly to create a small air pocket under the plank. Chi, unaware she was still alive, continued to shovel dirt over her while repeatedly saying, "You're going to die now." Chai believed that burying Young alive would ensure her death, but the shallow grave he dug was only about 19 inches, 50 centimeters deep, far from deep enough to guarantee that outcome. The weight of the wooden plank and the dirt he piled on her immobilized her, but she was still alive. For several hours, Young remained buried, struggling to breathe and thinking about how to save herself. Summoning all her strength, she managed to free her hands from the duct tape and began digging through the dirt with her bare hands. Despite her injuries and exhaustion, she pushed away the dirt, removed the wooden plank, and clawed her way out of the grave. Once free, she removed the tape from her eyes, regaining her sight. However, her relief quickly turned to terror when she realized that Chi's car was still parked near the grave. She had assumed he had left the area but was shocked to find his vehicle nearby. Frightened and desperate, Young ran as fast as she could, hoping he hadn't noticed her escape. It's likely that Chi was unaware she had emerged from the grave. Meanwhile, her family was deeply worried and the police were still searching for her throughout the area. Despite their efforts, they couldn't locate Young that night. Then, at around dawn the next morning, the police received a phone call that changed everything. A man living approximately 6 miles from the forest where Young had escaped reported a strange disturbance. He mentioned hearing noises outside and suspected that someone had entered his property. He then saw a shadowy figure moving near the small shed in his yard. The police arrived at the house with flashlights and found someone sitting in the garden. Thanks to the poster that was distributed to all patrol officers, they recognized the person as Yang Suk-in. She was in an entirely different state, covered in dirt and blood, with adhesive tape still wrapped around her neck. When Yang realized that the people approaching her were police officers, she started crying and screaming hysterically, telling them that her husband had tried to kill her and that she needed their protection. The officers immediately took her to the hospital. Fortunately, she did not have severe injuries, but she was psychologically devastated. At that time, the police continued searching for Che. In fact, it didn't take them long to find him. The next morning around 7 a.m., they received a report of a car parked just a few meters from the forest. When they arrived at the location, they found Che sitting inside the car. It seemed like he was searching for Yang in the forest and was likely shocked and surprised that she wasn't in the hole he had buried her in. The police arrested him and charged him with attempted murder, threats of death, kidnapping, and assault. Interestingly, he claimed to be innocent of all the charges except for the assault, but the evidence was all against him. When the police went to the location in the forest that Yang had described, they found the hole, which was clearly still freshly dug. There were visible drag marks leading to the hole, just as Yang had described. He had dragged her from the car to the hole. Yang also said she had been tied up with adhesive tape, and this was evident when they found her because the tape was still around her neck. Additionally, the police found in her house the tape that had strands of hair on it. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for October 19, 2022. On that day, Yang was unable to attend the hearing in person, but her lawyer attended on her behalf to read her statement. In her statement, Yang said, "Please do not release Che on bail. I am very afraid for my life. I want to ensure that he doesn't try to kill me again if he is released from prison." The judge granted her request, denying Che bail, and issued an order for him to have no contact with her or any of the witnesses. Despite all of this, Che's lawyer requested a reduced sentence, arguing that Che had served in the military and suffered from mental health issues related to his service, including post-traumatic stress disorder. The lawyer emphasized his military background to explain the mental health problems. In court, Che said that if he could turn back time, he wouldn't have done what he did to Yang. However, the court took the matter very seriously, particularly considering the lasting psychological effects it would have on Yang and her children. Before the sentence was delivered, Yang stated that since that day, her life and the lives of her children had been forever changed. She broke down and shared that she would live the rest of her life haunted by the traumatic memories of the incident. She asked the judge for the maximum penalty possible. In the end, Che pleaded guilty, and after 1.5 years of legal proceedings on April 22, 2024, the Supreme Court sentenced him to 13 years in prison. This means that when he is released, he will be around 67 years old. Not too old, but not young either. We can only hope that when he is out of prison, he will never come near Yang again. The story of Yang Suk-in is an extraordinary tale of courage and survival. What motivated her to fight for her life was likely her fear for her children and her instinct to survive. We sincerely hope that she can overcome the trauma and heal, allowing her to rebuild a normal life. Don't forget to share your thoughts about today's case.